Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Taiwan On podcast series presented by Striking Lure Company, Lou's Fishing, and Hannay's Marine. I'm Mike Frisch. I'm the host of the Taiwan On podcast, also the host of the Fishing the Midwest television series. And we have what we think will be a really fun episode tonight. We're going to have longtime BASS pro and now Major League Fishing pro, Mark Davis. Mark is a former Bassmaster Classic champion, multiple-time Angler of the Year, and he's just coming off a really good Major League Fishing tournament. So we're going to visit with Mark. After that, we'll be with Tim Emanuel. Tim, of course, is the general manager at Hannay's Marine in Minneapolis, and Tim will share some do's and don'ts for people purchasing a used outboard motor. Some good tips from Tim on some things that you can look for if you're in the market to repower your boat with a new used outboard motor. But first off, we're going to welcome in Mark Davis. Mark comes to us. He's, I believe, Mark, are you home in Arkansas right now?
I am here at home in Arkansas in the sweltering heat.
How hot is it in Arkansas? Sure.
Today, actually, the last couple of days have been better, but we've been right, give or take around 100 with high humidity. And it came early this year. Usually we get through June without it getting quite this severe, but it's pretty warm out there.
All right. So, Mark, you just returned home recently from your last major league event, Watts Bar Lake, I believe, in Tennessee, and you had a nice finish there, a fifth place finish. Tell us about that event, if you would.
Yeah, I had never fished Watts Bar before and got over there and with just a couple of days practice, and it was a tough fishery. It was. I had a really hard time in practice figuring anything out, and I finally settled on one area that, and I was able to catch. Day one had a really good day. Caught a couple of 5-pounders, and 5-pounders were like gold there. And then day two, I struggled. I only caught like 2 keepers. Caught a lot of fish, but it was 1.5 pounds minimum. I catch a lot of there's 1.6s, 1.7s. They wouldn't quite weigh 1.8. But then third day had another big round and big day and won the knockout round. And then on the championship day, I wound up 5th. And I started out catching those fish over on the red eye shad on Strike King. It's a sissy chrome, and casting a worm around, a big worm. And then as the tournament went on, it got harder and harder. And finally, at the end, I was fishing, drop shot, a little Strike King finesse worm, and a little 1/8 ounce weight to get some of those fish to bite. But it was a tough fishery. It really was. That's the first time I'd been over there. It was not easy.
Mm-hmm. Were those smallmouth or largemouth?
I caught all largemouth. Now, Ryan Salzman won that event, and he did catch some smallmouth on the face of the dam, on the actual vertical dam itself. He caught quite a few smallmouth down there.
That's what I thought. Okay. So, where are you guys headed next? Next event for you?
Our next event is in Cayuga, New York, which is near Auburn and Syracuse, New York. It's a finger lake. It's about 500 feet deep in this glacier lake. So it has smallmouth in it, but normally this time of the year they don't play much. It's more or less it's all largemouth fishing, but it's a lot of grass, and it's usually a good fishery.
Okay, and when do you guys head there?
We head there first week August, and then after that we're coming your way. We're coming to Mille Lacs, and forward to that, and hope the wind doesn't blow very hard. But
right.
Head to Mille Lacs, and then we've also I can't. I want to say something, but I can't. But I'm gonna get to fish some more stuff in Minnesota, but we just can't announce it just yet. I'll put it that way.
All right. That sounds good. So, Mark, let's talk, if we could, about some of the experiences that you've had in Minnesota. You talked about coming up here to fish Minnetonka. Talk about that and any other places, Midwest that you've been a little bit.
Oh yeah, it's Minnesota's always a treat. Anytime you live in the South and you get to come and fish, make a trip and fish, you know, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, New York, any of those states up there. That's you guys have really good fishing. In Minnesota, in particular, I know one of the funnest places I ever went was to Grand Rapids and all the lakes
Mm-hmm.
around Grand Rapids. You've got Pacagama and I can't remember. Most of them got these real weird names that I can't pronounce, but I stayed around
Right.
up there even after the event and fished a lot of other lakes because it's endless. You just go to this little lake. But what's interesting about those lakes? Some lakes are predominantly largemouth, some are predominantly smallmouth. Some lakes up there are not. They've all got some bass, but then some of them are not so much bass. They're more walleye. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would fish myself to death if I lived up there where you guys go.
Sure, sure. So when you were on Pokegama, how did you fish? And were you fishing smallmouth at the time? Or were you targeting largemouth, a little of each? And what kind of lures were you fishing?
That's a good question because the time that I fished Pacagama was a cup event. Those were in the dark. You didn't know where you were going. You couldn't research where you were going. So, they just take you to the launch ramp and dump you in the water with your tackle, and here we go. So, I don't know, going in whether there's largemouth, smallmouth. So I think
Mm-hmm.
best I remember, I was catching my fish on a jerkbait on grass lines, and I was catching a mixture, but mostly largemouth. But what
Mm-hmm.
a great lake, beautiful lake.
Sure, sure. How about Mille Lacs? You spent some time on Mille Lacs?
I have spent some time on Mille Lacs. Uh, Not much fun if the wind blows, but
Right?
you know, it is. I would say of all the lakes that I fished over the years, I would deem it the number one trophy smallmouth lake. If you want to catch a 6 pound plus smallmouth, that's a great place to go. And I told some friends of mine down here one time, yeah, go to Mille Lacs. Well, they went up there, drove from Arkansas and they got up there and the wind blew every day. And I'm saying, hey guys, I told them, they left there disappointed because the wind blew, and I said, if you guys would have called or just took a look at a map, there's all kind of lakes just right there. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, because I've been up there and the wind blows, and I said, well, we'll run over here and fish this little lake or that little. They're not huge lakes, but they're 1,000 acres, and they're full of fish, every one of them. So when the wind blows, you just don't go to the big lake. You drive down the street down here and go to this lake and catch them. But they didn't know that. They left them up there disgusted because they just hit it wrong. It was just bad timing on the weather.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So, Mark, let's shift bases a little bit. Um, and before we go right to what we're going to talk about, some shallow water crankbait fishing. One other thing I guess I want to ask you before we get to that is Minnetonka. Back in your BASS days, I'm guessing that you spent some time in Minnetonka. What were your thoughts, your impressions of Minnetonka?
Oh, Minnetonka it was great, and great largemouth fishing. Uh, I've been there when they were still, some of them just getting through spawning, and it amazed me at the numbers. That lake and it's got quality fish in it as well, and it's got deep rock and all that grass, and it's a fish factory. And I haven't been on it in many many years, but I can remember I could crank a deep crankbait in that deep grass in that clear water and catch them big, 3 to 5 pound largemouth. I can remember that about Minnetonka. That's a lot of fun.
Yep, sure, sure. And it still is an awesome fishery. So let's talk about what you just talked about. Crankbait fishing in the summer. Um, Give us, tell us what you're looking for in terms of location to start with, and then we can talk baits and that kind of stuff a little bit.
Sure, that's a really broad subject, and a lot of it depends on where you're at, your location. I know down here. we're already looking at water temperatures 90 degrees. So in this part of the world, cranking right now, this time of the year, you really need some colored water. You need some stain. If you don't have stain, the water's clear. It's really hard on these lakes to catch any fish cranking. And the same can be said for all the Tennessee River lakes and so many lakes in the South. Now, in the North, different story. You don't necessarily have to have stained water. You can get away with clear water, but I think it's certainly better if you've got good conditions, like you got wind or you got some cloud cover. Makes the crankbait bite work a lot better, just like it in the spinnerbait. All reaction baits work better when you've got some wind. But in the
Sure.
South, you've got to have some color. If the water is not stained up, I'm gonna say 18 inches, 18-inch visibility, something like that's what I'm looking for. 2 feet at the most visibility. If I can see a lure deeper than 2 feet, I'm probably not going to be cranking, especially this time of the year when the water's hot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. How about in down in our part of the world or up in our part of the world where we have more grass? You talked about the clear water, deep weed lines, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, deep weed lines, and I like to look for irregularities in the weed line. So I'm gonna study a weed line. If I can find, I can remember on Minnetonka, you would have just these massive grass flats, and then you
Mm-hmm.
would have the weeds growing out into 15, 18 feet of water, and then just make it a straight line. Well, a lot of times with the trolling motor, but more times than not with the outboard. Before that grass is all the way up tall, and when you're actually seeing the grass on the depth finder, I'm gonna follow that weed line, not necessarily fishing. I'm looking for an indentation or a point, anything different along that weed line, and then I'm gonna waypoint those and come back and fish them. But yeah, I can remember on Minnetonka uh, up there, and I don't want to call what time of the year it was, and it was just a matter of staying on those weed lines, and because the fish were scattered, and sometimes they do get
Mm-hmm.
where they're scattered, and other times they're grouped up. When they're grouped up, they're usually on those irregularity type places, point or an indentation, something different. But when they're scattered, that makes it harder because you just have to fish and grind and just go and go and go and stay on that outside line of weeds and just crank and crank and crank, and you're gonna catch one here, you're gonna catch one there, and that's fine. But I always like to find them schooled up, grouped up. It's a lot easier and quicker.
Sure. Right. So, Mark, if you would talk about, let's say, you talked about that 15 to 18 foot weed line. Um, are you paralleling the outside edge? Then is that basically what you're trying to do?
Basically paralleling. I'll sit off the weeds a little ways, but I'm basically, yes, I am paralleling down the weeds. 'Cause I'm going to keep my lure on that line as much as possible. So the other good thing about it, because you're constantly watching your depth finder, and with even fishing weeds, uh, with all this forward facing sonar that we have now, if you can keep your boat on the outside of those weeds, a lot of times you're going to pick up some fish on your forward face. And I'm not by Lowrance active target. I'll see fish out there off the weeds, and of course a lot
Mm-hmm.
of them are buried in the weeds or sitting in the weeds where you're not going to see them. But if you see a fish or two on the outside of those weeds, a lot of times it's giving away several more that you can't see. So staying just off the
Sure.
weeds, but fishing down that weed line. Another
Okay.
thing I would
Okay.
say,
And
I like to cast. If the wind's blowing, I want the wind to I'll come. I want to cast with the wind. Put the wind in my back, cast with the wind, and cover
mm-hmm.
the water that way. Rather than like if you're fishing with a worm or a jig, you want to fish in the wind so you can go slow cranking. I like to go with the wind.
Right. Right. So talk about, Mark, the baits. Let's say we're out on that 15 to 18 foot weed line, because in our waters here in the Midwest, we especially with zebra mussels in the clear waters that we do have, it seems like we have some, a lot of weed lines are predominantly that 15 to 20 foot edge. Talk about the baits that you're going to throw there.
I'll throw a lot of different stuff. I'll start usually when I'm trying. Of course, you're going to refine this, but when I start looking and hunting for fish, I'm gonna have a Strike King 3XD tied on one rod on 10-pound test. And if the bite's tough and they want something small, I can get that 3XD and if those you can throw it a long ways, you can get it really deep on 10. But by the same token, sometimes I may want that 3XD to run a little shallower. So I may go up in line size to keep it from running so deep. And then my next bait is just a regular old Series 5 from Strike King. It's a good, I call it a 10-foot bait. And I'll throw it on, usually on 12, but I can go
Mm-hmm.
up. If I want to run a shallower, I can certainly drop down to 10 if I want to go a little bit deeper. Then when you start talking about fishing out there in that 15 to 18 and getting your bait, down to that 15-foot depth, then you're talking about a 5XD and a 6XD. And again, I'm gonna vary my line sizes to fine tune how deep I want those lures to run. Because sometimes you don't want to run. You don't need for it to run its maximum depth. Depending on the grass and
Right.
how the fish are set up. So line size is a big part of cranking. Line size and the length of your cast, and of course your rate of retrieve also. But all those things determine how deep that lure is going to run.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How about lure color, Mark? What are your ideas, your thoughts there?
I'll tell you that Strike King, every time I have a tournament up north, anywhere up north, and I don't care if it's in New York or where it is, Minnesota, Wisconsin, I will throw. There's one color called summer shad. So summer shad to me looks like it is more. It's a dark shad, and it looks more like in the South, we call them goggle eye. Up north, I think you guys, I've heard them called Rocky Jones. I've heard them called rock bass, but it's not a shad, but it's a dark color. That that one color I catch and I don't go north without that color. Of course, I've got my other stuff too. I love citrus shad, especially around smallmouth or if the water's got a little color. If I could only have one color for crankbait, it would be citrus shad, without a doubt, because it's got the right blend of colors that it'll work in clear, stain, and muddy water. It's just a very versatile color, and to me, cranking is more about when I'm cranking, I'm looking, I'm trying to find a group of fish. Once I find the fish, then I'll start changing colors and doing all that sort of stuff. But if I don't know what color to throw, I've usually got citrus shad tied on.
Good, good stuff. Mark, talk about line. Are you throwing fluorocarbon, monofilament? Even some guys talking about throwing braid now around weeds. What are your thoughts?
I'm fluorocarbon, for cranking, definitely fluorocarbon. You know, yeah, if you're jigging worm fishing, certainly, Bray does a good job. But for cranking, and I'll say this: there's nothing wrong with fishing with monofilament. I mean, it's got a little more stretch, but it's more castable. And I see a lot of guys that are going back and using monofilament in a lot of situations where just a few years ago, everybody, oh, you got to have fluorocarbon, but monofilament has still got a big place in my, I still spinnerbait fish, and
Mm-hmm.
at times I'll crank, I'll Carolina rig. And another thing, if you get around a lot of zebra mussels, okay, if you're fishing a jig, a worm, or Carolina rig, a drop shot, go to monofilament because mono does not. Those zebras do not cut monofilament as fast as they do fluorocarbon. That is a fact. Fluorocarbon is harder, and those zebra mussels cut it a lot easier. Uh, and I'll give you an example of this. So a couple of years ago, we were fishing up at Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. I was catching smallmouth on a Carolina rig on some bridge filings that had these big clusters of zebra mussels, and I went to this some tour grade 20-pound test mono after I broke off 2 or 3. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the thing about MLF, when you lose a fish, this a scoreable bass, and that comes right off the bottom line. I mean, it's detrimental every fish you lose, so it's magnified. But anyway, I went to mono, and the toughness of it and the forgiveness of it, and those big smallmouths would have me, you know, around those zebras, and I'd get them out, and yeah, my line would be cut up, but I would land the fish.
Right, right. Interesting, very interesting. So, Mark, let's take it to the next step. Let's talk about, you talked about retrieve speed a little bit. Walk us through that, and then talk about reel selection as well.
Yeah, it's a whole system, and so we'll talk about the crankbait itself, because when you cast a crankbait out, and I already said that the further you cast it, the lighter the line you throw it on, the deeper it's going to run. So you start to wind it back to the boat, and I ask people all the time, well, how do you get it deep? How do you get it deep? Well, you don't get it deep by winding it as fast as you can, because think about this. So the lure's diving, okay, it's doing this job, and you're over here in the boat, and you got that line connected to that lure. So as that lure's diving, if you're winding as hard as you can, you're not giving your line time to travel with the lure. So you're forcing the lure. The lure's digging, but then you've got this arc in your line, this boat, back to your rod. So to answer your question, how to get, if you want to get deepest, the deepest you're going to get your lure is a long cast, and just a medium, what I call just a medium retrieve. You're going to let the lure do its thing and the line travel with it. And that's where the fluorocarbon helps, because it does tend to sink. It's harder and heavier, and it's going to get your lure the deeper. A lot of guys think, well, the faster you wind it, the deeper it goes. No, the faster you wind it, yeah, it'll get down there, but you'll get it deeper on just a good medium retrieve, and let that line travel through that water. Because you got to think about it, there's a lot of friction on a long
Sure,
cast with that line. It has to work its way through that water column just like your lure does. So that's part of it. And you want me to talk a little bit about reels? You
sure.
know,
Yep,
there was a time not long ago I was saying 5 to 1, 5 to 1, 5 to 1 on gear ratios, and now it's more. I'm at that 6.4 to 1, and Luz has got all these great reels, and I'm the new BB1 Pro. They've got that 6 to 1 in it, and that's my cranking reel nowadays. It's got a slightly larger spool than like the Hypermag does and those reels. So it gives you a little bit more line capacity, not as much as the OBB1. Now, if you want to really stretch it out there, long, super long cast, go with that wide spool, BB1, because at the end of the day, if you're cranking big lures, I'm talking about 6XDs, 8XDs, 10XDs, you do want to use a 5 to 1 reel, and you do want that big spool with a lot of line capacity. And if you're cranking a 10XD, I throw it on 15. I want 15-pound fluorocarbon, so you need a lot of line to make that long cast. So it all
sure.
depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But nowadays, I'm at that 6 to 1 gear ratio. So I told you my reel of choice now for cranking is the new BB1 Pro.
hmm hmm Let's talk then rods. Are you throwing the XD series? What's your favorite as far as that?
I like my XD rods from Luz really well. The 5, in my opinion, everyone's got an opinion. in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, I love the rods. I'm not. That's no. In no way is this a knock on the rod because I love the rods. Use them every day. But the 5XD rod uh, is really a little light for a 5XD for what I want. Now, for the next guy, he may think it's perfect, but I like the 6XD rod, and I do a lot of stuff with it. The 5XD, yeah, I like it, but I'm usually throwing a Series 5 or a 3XD on that rod. But that's just personal preference. Everyone's got their. But now let's talk a little bit more about that rod. So the 5XD and the 6XD, they're 7.5 feet. They're ultra super light, and they're very well balanced. They've got that wind grip handle on them, so the balance of them and they're so lightweight. I know the first time I was really using one was we were fishing in. I got a couple of them before they hit the market. We were at dadgummit, St. Clair, Michigan,
Okay.
great smallmouth fishery, and I was speed reeling a 5XD, and I was using the 5XD rod. And it done a great job, and it was amazing to me at the end of the day how much better I felt with that rod having cranked all day long hard as opposed to. And I'll be honest, the other rod that I like is also loose, and it's Kevin's rod, is the KVD rod, and like the CC6 and the CC4. And I love those rods. They're heavy. When I mean they're little, because they've got some glass in them. They're a heavier rod. They've certainly stayed. I've got them in my boat right now. There are times when I love them, but they do tend to fatigue you much more than those XD rods do. So, and Kevin designed them with a slightly shorter handle, which makes the rod a little top heavy, and you've got the composite blanket. It's got a lot of glass in it. So yeah, it's a beefier rod, it's more weight out there on the end, especially. So, but after 500 casts at the end of the day, you're like, oh, I'm ready for a nap, but not so much D rods.
Yep. Yeah, I think that XD rod is. I don't know. I think it's the home run in the crankbait rods right now that's on the market.
It
I
is.
believe.
It's the best one out there, uh, without a doubt. And I've shown it to a lot of guys, let them fish with mine, and you know, I just the 6XD rod to me. And we're talking about cranking big baits. The
Yep.
6XD rod. If I had a sack, if I had my rod box full of those, and that'd be the only crankbait rod I would ever really need, because I like one that's a little bit heavier than that 5XD rod. But I tell you what, I caught all those big smallmouth on the 5XD rod. We were up there last year, and I just fell in love with it. Absolutely fell in love with that rod.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, Mark, that 6XD is my favorite as well. And I guess the thing that I like about it is that little heavier action when you get around grass.
Yes.
You can snap that rod and it'll break that grass off and come clean right away.
To me, the 6XD rod is the perfect cranking rod. I mean, it's everyone's got their preference, but to me, if I could only have one, I'm like you, that'd
Right.
be my pick.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. So, Mark, when you're out cranking, say, a deep weed line in the summer, you find some fish, you catch some fish, and they stop biting. Do you change crankbait color? Do you go to a jig or a worm or something else? Or walk us through that process a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, usually changing colors is not the best option. Normally, changing techniques is the best option, and you know, every group of fish, uh, you know, the more times you present a lure to them and they see it, and some of them bite it, some of them get caught. Of course, they may get released, but you're educating those fish, and they get a little smarter and a little more wary. And it's definitely have to be willing to change techniques. And so many times I'm going from a crankbait. Now I might pick up something like a swim bait and show them a swim bait, something a little more subtle, but still a reaction type lure. And then at other times, I may go right from a crankbait to a drop shot or a little, something real finessey to get more on the bite. You've got to, and other times it may be a jig. Sometimes it is a jig, but more times than not, for me, it seems like in today's world, it's like you find some fish, you catch them on a reaction bait like a crankbait, and then you have to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and go really, really finesse to catch any more of them. And that's not always the case, but it just seems like nowadays that's more times than not that's what happens to me.
Sure. So we've talked a lot about, we're coming into that summer peak, the heat of the summer. It's 100 in the Midwest this week. It's very warm where you're at too. But let's fast forward a little bit as the water starts to cool down and get into fall. What changes in your repertoire as far as crankbait fishing then?
You know, in the fall, down here where I live, it's they certainly September can be, and honestly, the last few years seems like September and October are just an extension of August.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get really cool down. Mid October, late October, we start getting some cooler weather. I know up there where you guys are at, you may start getting some fronts through, and the water temperature starts dropping. And, a lot of these lakes that I fish in the north in the fall, I notice that different types of grass go away pretty early. I know some of those cabbage grasses and things like that. I've seen them even in late August. They start to
Yep.
disappear. They kind of peak out in June and July, then they start to go away. And when that starts happening, that does open up some opportunities, for cranking in those areas
Mm-hmm.
where those weeds, start to lay back down. And you don't think about weeds dying when the water's still relatively warm, but a lot of these, you know, uh, these grasses, they just have a lifespan of they sprout up and they grow, and then I know and the wind blows or I don't know what happens, but the grass, goes away, and I've seen it happen as early as August. So yeah, when that stuff starts happening, a crankbait certainly when you got voids in the grass, that's an opportunity to catch them with a crankbait, certainly.
Sure, absolutely. Mark, we're going to let you go here in a little bit, but I'd like to take, because I always enjoy talking to, a veteran pro, particularly someone with a resume like you have. You won the Bassmasters Classic, was it 1996?
95.
95, okay. Um, let's go down memory lane. Tell us what happened in that tournament and, how you found those fish and how you won it.
I was probably more surprised to win that classic than anyone because uh, at that time in my career, I was needing a title, because titles are what makes careers in bass fishing. When I mean titles, Bassmaster Classic titles and Angler of the Year titles. So I'd won Angler of the Year that year, and I had no idea I'd win that classic. I just won Angler of the Year. No one had ever won, in the same year, and I was the most surprised guy there. But it's just like fishing is no different than other sports. You see a lot of athletes. They kind of get in a zone, and where everything you do it just works out. And I really did my homework for that classic. And if I could, you know, attribute any one thing that that happened that week would probably went back to my homework. In fact, I've still got somewhere around here the notes that I made six
Cool.
weeks prior. Brush pile notes and things that I'd found and because you find out if you write them down and then you review them, then it keeps it fresh in your mind. But I remember it's been a while. I remember the first morning starting out with a top water and catching a limit, and I'll never forget. David Fritz lived there in that area, and he had
Sure.
this armada of boats chasing him and watching him. So I was catching on top water on seawalls, on main lake seawalls, and Fritz come by and about 50 boats behind him, and it just destroyed this area I was in. I mean, it wasn't David's fault. It just
Right.
all that boat traffic, it just wiped it out, and the banks were all muddy, and so when that happened, I thought, well, I've got to go do something else. And I had a limited fish, and I went and started cranking and worming and fishing some of that brush, and I caught a 5 pounder and I lost a 5 pounder that same day. That was the first day. Second day was really the pivotal day, and that was the day that I caught a couple cranking deep, and of course you didn't in those days the classic you got one short practice day, so you're not anywhere near dialed in to what's really going on out there. So I'm still
Sure.
throwing a worm and I'm throwing a jig and things like that. And I thought, I need a big spinner bait. I really need a big 1 ounce spinner bait. And I didn't have one tied on. I didn't have one rigged up. And I stopped during the tournament. Just stopped fishing and sat down in the boat and built one. When I say I built it, I put the blades on it I wanted and kind of tricked it out. There was a big 1 ounce strike king. Got the skirt color on there I wanted, the trailer on there I wanted, and all that. And I tied on, I'm casting that brush, and it was deep. What it was deep brush that crappie fishermen had built. And out in deep water, and they backed it up real tall. And the fish were only using the top of the brush. They weren't, they were sitting up here. They weren't like down in it or, on the bottom of it. They were just kind of suspended up here on the top of it. And, uh, I can remember, you know, I tried to worm, I tried to jig, and I cranked, and now I've got the spinnerbait on. So I'm winding the spinnerbait around and winding it around and winding it around. So at one point in time, I remember my line was in the brush, and you could feel, you're slow rolling it through that brush. You're afraid you're going to get hung, right? So I
Yep.
sped my spinnerbait up and kind of crashed it through the brush, and then killed it. And when I did, I catch a 6 pounder. I
Wow.
thought, and it was just like a light went off. Boom. That's what they want. So the next brush pile, first cast, get my spinnerbait in there slow. When I get in the limbs real good, and I burn it through those limbs and killed it, catch another 5 pounder. And this was all on the big spinnerbait. So an hour later, I've got 20 pounds and 5 bass. I thought, man, I need to leave these fish alone for the day and hope they'll hold up for the more. And I come back the next day and did the same thing again and won the classic. But I'll tell you, I was the most surprised guy there because I was so happy to have already won Angler of the Year. Had no idea I was going to win the classic.
Wow. So Angler of the Year and Bassmasters Classic champion the first year. You got
Yeah,
your two
yeah.
titles.
That was that. I was up until that point I was a fishing guide, and after that point I was a bass pro. Yeah, that was the year that got my career going. It did.
That's a cool story. So, Mark, let me ask you, what prompted the switch to the spinnerbait? Just intuition, or
It just experience. I've seen so many times because spinnerbait and crankbait have a lot of the same qualities. I mean they displace water. Uh, they're a reaction type lure. The water had some color. And the good thing about a spinnerbait, especially a big heavy one like that, you can keep it down and you can wind it slow through that brush, and you can speed it up, bang it, you can stop it. There's a lot of things you can do just like you can with a crankbait. And the water had, the water, it was strange. The water looked clear. So this is a little a lesson for you. So a lot of times in the summertime, think about what I'm going to say here. So the water in the lake is pretty clear and it's really warm. And say it's like our water here at home right now is 90, 89, 90. When you get a cold summertime big complex of rain that comes in, and High Rock Lake where the classic was, it's not a huge lake. So you get a lot of rain and it's cooler water coming out of the sky. That's how storms are. Summertime storms, that water a lot of times it's 70 degrees. So you get a 70
Sure.
degree water temperature runoff that's flowing into a lake, into an impoundment. Not so much on a natural lake, different story, but on these impoundments, because got all these tributaries that feed and the river that feeds. So you got all that influx of this rainwater from a big summer, like a 2 or 3 day storm event where there was more. We're not talking about an inch of rain; we're talking about several inches of rain. So you put all that 70 degree water into a lake where the water is 90 degrees. And keep something in mind. So cold water is denser, it's
Mm-hmm.
heavier. So that dirty water was underneath, and the clear water
Sure.
was on top. To look at the lake, you think, oh, it's pretty clean. But I noticed when I'd move around on my outboard, you got your prop down there, turning up
Mm-hmm.
water, there'd be a mud trail. So what was
Mm-hmm.
happening with those fish? You had this cooler, muddy water down here, and this clean, clear water on top, and those fish were suspending just about right where those two met, which was, in that 6, 7, 8, 9 foot,
Sure.
however deep it was. But that was the situation for that classic. And I realized it the first day, and that's why I was fishing shallow with a topwater, because you didn't have to deal with that dirty water underneath the clear. But if you ever run into that, and your listeners out there, if you ever encounter that, and a lot, but more so on a man-made lake now than on a natural lake, when you're going to encounter that. But keep that in mind; those fish will suspend where those two waters meet.
That makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. Good stuff right there. Mark, we so much appreciate you taking the time to spend with us tonight. Your knowledge and the ideas you shared are awesome and really, really good stuff for our listeners, and we appreciate you spending the time with us tonight.
You're very welcome. Always a pleasure.
All right, very good. So, folks, that's Mark Davis. Mark, as you just learned, um, an angler who won the Bassmaster Angler of the Year, the BASS Angler of the Year, and the Bassmasters Classic in the same year, and is now a Major League Fishing pro, and some outstanding information on fishing crankbaits and spinnerbaits as well. So, with that, we're going to switch gears, and we are going to go and catch up with our man who knows outboard motors, Tim Emanuel from Hanays Marine. We know Tim more affectionately as the ice cream man because last year when we did our podcast, we actually did them from Hanays Marine, and Tim was gracious enough to purchase ice cream for myself and Thomas, our producer. So we appreciate that, and we're kind of missing that this year. But Timmy, welcome to Taiwan On. What's going on down in the cities? Is it hot enough for you?
Oh, it's a hot one today. Yeah, I'm worrying about you because I don't know what the ice cream situation in Elbow Lake is right now.
Yeah, ice cream is hard to come by, especially when the stores all close about 8 o'clock. So you got to get your Klondike bars ahead of time if you're hanging out in Elbow Lake. So,
Well,
but
and refrigeration just came to town. I heard a few years ago.
yes, this is true. This is true. Usually you don't got to worry about me and ice cream. Though. I usually have a supply. I got that part in life figured out. Not
You
much
figured
else,
it out.
but I got ice cream figured out. So.
Good to hear.
Timmy, let's talk used motors today, and our subject is going to be more specifically the do's and don'ts of buying a used motor. And then you guys have recently, in my understanding, is taken in quite a few used engines on trade in the not too or in the last few weeks, and we'll talk a little bit about your inventory. But first of all, let's get into if I'm in the market for a used engine, where do I look and what should I look for?
Well, it's kind of funny because I think a lot of people think that I have a secret recipe for how we sell our used products, and I would say that Facebook and Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist play a very big role in us selling all of the used stuff. We definitely have the website, and that does help get people to find stuff that we have. But definitely, Facebook Marketplace seems to kind of be overtaking Craigslist lately as becoming a little bit more popular. And Craigslist has been around forever, and so both of those are great resources. Depending on the style of boat that you're looking for, some of the walleye boats out there, Walleye Central has still been a pretty decent website to post to, but not just Facebook Marketplace, even the Facebook groups. Basscat has a really good, tight-knit group of guys in Yarcraft, and oftentimes you'll see used boats posted there. Motors generally you're just gonna find on the Craigslist, the Facebook marketplaces, and websites like ours.
Okay. So, if I am looking for a used engine, am I better off with a dealer, private party? I mean, my inclination, without having given this a ton of thought, is that if I go through a dealer, maybe there's some warranty there, maybe not. But at least the motor has probably been tested and checked over, correct?
Exactly. One of the things as far as it's buyer beware out there, and unfortunately we get calls to our parts department, our service department, and even sales all the time of people that got ripped off out there. So you got to do a little bit of homework, and you got to kind of know what you're looking for when you go out there. Hopefully, if you are buying from a dealer, it's a reputable dealer, and that they went through the boat motor, and hopefully that there's going to be some warranty. Most of our stuff is warranted for 30 days. And if you're buying something in the wintertime, we usually would do a warranty 30 days past the Minnesota fishing opener, because we realize this stuff is used. Some of the stuff sits here for a while. A lot of the motors we have here right now, we've had for a long time. The problem that we have is that we've been so busy doing deliveries and getting pontoons and all of the new fishing boats ready, we just haven't had time to squeeze some of these used repowers into the schedule. And now that the new boats are kind of dying off a little bit, we're finding time, so that's when they're going online. So definitely you're gonna hopefully have a little bit more accountability buying from a dealer, and like I say, hopefully they went through it. Hopefully they will warranty it. That's all stuff that we do here on all of our motors.
Okay, so what kind of things in particular should I look for? I mean, what questions do I ask? Hours on the engine, that kind of stuff. Walk us through that a little bit.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the one thing that you mentioned, hours on the engine, and that kind of drives me nuts, because that is what everybody asks, and a lot of people get nervous if they hear a number in their head and they think that it's high. Here's the thing that you got to remember: every single motor that's made, whether it's a Mercury, Yamaha, Suzuki, whatever it is, carries the same warranty whether you're using it in Minnesota for 4 to 5 months a year, or whether you're taking it down to Florida and using it in saltwater 12 months a year. So, moral of the story is, unless you're full-time guiding, even most of the tournament fishermen and even most of the guides don't put as many hours on a motor in this area as what just casual use gets usually down in some of the southern states. So people might hear that a motor has 1,000 hours on it and think that that's a lot, when most of today's four-strokes have life before they would need to be rebuilt, that you could definitely see 7,000 plus hours on. So the Minnesota average, I would say, is somewhere between 30 and 50 hours. So, if you do the math, it's going to take somebody a long time in this state to wear out a motor. So that being said, hours is kind of good to know, but just like with cars and how many miles are on it, I'd take a boater with more hours on it that I could tell had a good maintenance history than one that the owner never changed oil or gear oil in and never kept up with maintenance. So that's definitely something that you want to take a look at, but don't always be nervous about the hours. And I encourage people, if they would have a question about something, that they could always call us, and either the sales guy, myself or Tom, or our Don, our service manager, and bounce a question or two off of us if you're looking for something private party.
What about in addition to hours, which on some engines it's hard to do? I don't think
some you just don't even get to check. Almost every motor that we have that comes through here, we do a compression check on.
Okay.
And that's going to be probably the most accurate test to be able to tell you whether a motor is healthy or not. All of the motors that we bring through here, we drain the lower unit oil and check the gear case just to make sure that there's no milkiness to the oil, that all the seals are good in the lower unit. The other thing is that we start and run every engine. A lot can be said if a motor sitting there is having trouble idling, that can definitely lead to bigger problems. It might sound like something that isn't a big deal, but motors that aren't idling could either be something wrong with the fuel system. It could be a bad cylinder as far as low compression on a cylinder. Usually you can find a lot out about just how smoothly a motor idles. Definitely want to just check the output of the water pump when it's running. I always recommend you hear a motor run, no matter what. If you're definitely buying it private party, you want to see that thing run, make sure water's pumping out of it, and make sure it's going to sit and idle. If the motor is on a boat still and you can get out to a lake to test drive it, that doesn't hurt either.
Sure, good stuff. Is there anything you can tell by visually looking at the motor?
Not in particular. Most of the time, even on motors that are 30 years old, you can pop the cowl and, they look kind of pretty brand new. And unlike a car engine that gets driven down dirt roads and dust, they stay pretty clean. If you pop the cowl and notice a bad fuel smell, that could be leading to problems. Or if you see a bunch of oil, down in the lower cowl section, that could be problems, but that also could just be residual oil if you're running an older two-stroke engine. The efficiency wasn't always the best, and sometimes they just spit oil out of the front of the carburetors and fuel. So, and a motor that might have some faded paint on it, that could just mean that it was sitting on a boat out in the elements. Doesn't necessarily mean it was used a lot. So definitely hearing the thing run is what's going to give you the most accurate idea what if any issues there are.
Good stuff, Tim. All right, so let's shift gears and let's talk about your inventory right now. Give us some of the highlights of some of the things that the engines that you guys at Hanna's Marine have available if I'm in the repower market right now.
I've got some smaller motors and I've got some mid-range motors. I was just kind of looking through our inventory. I got a really nice 2013 Mercury Pro Kicker tiller in a 20-inch shaft. We got a nice Suzuki 20-inch long, I believe it's a 9.9, and kind of got a few motors in that horsepower range. I got a two-stroke 20-horse Johnson, and I got some newer stuff. I got some older stuff. I know I have a 75, a 90, and a 60 horse Mercury. All of that stuff is up on our website right now. It's kind of a hodgepodge of very different motors, but like I said, it's just kind of what we've accumulated over the course of the last 6 months that we're just now getting a little bit of time to get it through our shop, because usually we'll do a quick look over of the motor when we are buying it from the customer, and then we do another like a pre-delivery inspection on it, make sure everything's good before we get it prepped for sale.
On those bigger engines, Tim, will you guys hang them and rig them on a boat for a customer tour?
Yes, we will. Yep, definitely.
Good stuff. Good.
Yep,
right.
Either or. I mean, the last couple I've loaded into the backs of trucks on pallets, but we also definitely do that install service too.
All right, good. Tim, let's shift gears again. You guys have an event coming up this weekend, a tent sale. Walk us through that a little bit. Tell us what you got going on.
The tent sale is an annual event, and it is, we put a big tent up in the parking lot, and We are part of the Hanny's business is wholesale distribution, and they bring over pallets upon pallets of stuff. Usually we have a lot of seats. Some of this stuff is discontinued. Some of it may have been returned. Some of it is just open box. It's kind of funny. A lot of this stuff, we have no idea where it comes from. We have a lot of reps that rep products that they sell to us that may have other products that they sell to, some of the big box stores like Shields. One year we had a big pallet of gun cases. I mean, the stuff that is here is just very random. We're going to have a ton of props out there, secondhand, refurbished, used once, stainless steel and aluminum props we're going to have. A lot of times we have fishing tackle. We got a lot of boat cleaning products. It's hard to say what all is in it because it's different every year, but I guarantee anybody that stops down is going to find something that they like. We generally, too, real quick, have a lot of tubes and water toys that are available, too. So,
okay, good. That sounds like something where a guy like me probably should stay away because I'd spend some money at a deal like that.
Yeah, I can. I spend a lot of money myself there, and it's kind of funny because I'm telling you what I think is going to be in there, but they don't open it up to employees ahead of time because we're kind of a bunch of vultures here, and we don't need a bunch of us digging through all of these pallets of stuff making a mess before the tent sale starts. So I get to see what's in it when everybody else gets to for the first time on Thursday.
Okay, so tell us the hours of the sale.
So the hours of the sale will be open on Thursday from 9 until 7, Friday 9 until 6, and Saturday from 9 until 1.
And those are your traditional summertime hours,
Yep,
too.
those are our traditional summertime hours, yep.
Last two things, and we'll let you go to the Dairy Queen. Number one, give us your website address if folks want to check out your inventory, and then your phone number as well.
Yep, website is www.hannays, marine.com. And if you just go over to the inventory section, you can pull up a separate section for used boats and used motors. Otherwise, you can check out. We do have some new motors here, too. Got a few Suzuki 70s, 90s, Yamaha 50, maybe a Yamaha 25 off the top of my head. So definitely check us out there. And, we're open right now, summer hours, from 9 until 7 on Monday, Thursday, 9 until 6 Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and 9 until 1 on Saturdays.
Very good. Thanks, Tim. We'll catch up with you again next week.
Thanks, Mike.
You bet. Well, there you have it, folks. That was Tim Emanuel, and that will conclude this week's episode of Tie One On, the video podcast series, Fishing the Midwest video podcast series presented by Strike King Lures, Lose Fishing, and our good friends at Hanny's Marine as well. That's our friend Hank in the background. He decided he wanted to be part of the Tie One On podcast here at the end as well, I guess. But anyway, next week our tentative plan is to have BASS, Bassmaster Touring Pro, Bill Lowen is our scheduled guest for next week. Of course, this time of the year, the fishing pros are really busy and schedules change, so it's always tentative. But that's the plan next week, to catch up with Bill Lowen and talk some more bass fishing. So from all of us at Fishing the Midwest and our Tie One On podcast series, also from our producer, Thomas Quimby, I'm Mike Frisch. As always, enjoy your time on the water, be safe, and include a youngster in your next outdoors adventure.